Hey guys, Fox here. So, I have a big project coming out within the next week, and it's going to be a new top RPG video from me. But, I wanted to do something before that in a little type of celebration of this big project, and I decided to reach out to a bunch of my YouTube friends and see if they would send me a little video about their personal top 3 to 5 RPGs of all time. So, I hope you guys enjoy this little collab effort here, and thanks for watching.
And welcome to my contribution to Fox's video of my top favorite 5 RPGs. So I had to stretch things a little bit and come up with some RPG adjacent games. I do like this genre, but my attention span usually can't stay entertained with a full RPG, so a lot of the titles in my top 5 are action RPGs, as well as some other variety. These I just decided to display chronologically instead of in ranking order, so we're going to talk a little bit about the games that meant the most to me over time. First one of these is Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. This is probably the most basic pick of my litter, but overall I feel like you have to have a Zelda series game in this top 5 list, and this is the one that I played absolutely the most. Bought this game as soon as it came out as a kid, and still would sit down and play this today with no problem. I beat it so many times in the 90s that I actually sold off my original copy, and this is a beat-up replacement copy that I got in the box a few years ago, but definitely could put in a lot of time in this game, as any time. It's just so easy to pick up and play, and of all the Zelda games, this is the one I would come back to the most. So next we're going to talk about another very popular choice. This one is a true RPG, and this is the one that kind of got me more interested in the genre as a whole. This is Final Fantasy VII, the original release for the PS1. I have not gotten into the new remake yet, I haven't picked that up, but this is the one that really hooked me on the genre as a whole, and got me to explore a lot of the other games that came out as RPGs for the PS1 library, as well as some of the other Final Fantasy games that came prior to this one. Really, this game needs no introduction, it's incredibly popular even today, but overall had just a very unique story that was really easy to get into and play as soon as this came out on release. So very happy to have that one as well. Next is one that I'm very happy to have in my collection. This is another one I've owned since the late 90s, and that is Magic Knight Rayearth for the Sega Saturn. So this is a very interesting Working Designs published action RPG, and it was a very early Japanese Saturn game that took almost 4 full years to become the very final US release on the Sega Saturn. And Working Designs really took their humor level to the max on this game. I would say if you are into their writing style, this is the one where it really flourished. The game is beautiful, has wonderful hand-drawn 2D graphics, and the switchable characters on the fly really adds a lot to the gameplay. This is one, again, I would easily pick up and play at any time, and I think it's very accessible for somebody wanting to get into action RPGs, so highly recommend this one as well. My next one is probably one of the more unique choices on my list. This is a game that just grabbed me entirely, and this is of the strategy RPG subgenre, I guess. This is Front Mission 3, and ultimately this was a very different style of game for me to play. I probably hadn't really dug into strategy RPGs when this originally came out about 20 years ago. What I really liked about this game is just a lot of flexibility in the gameplay style. You had this very deep in-game internet, which was a very unique concept at the time when this came out. I really like the branching storylines. There's essentially 2 separate stories in this game that last about 75 to 80 hours each. So there's a lot of depth in this game. I've played a few other games in the Front Mission series since this came out. They ultimately didn't hold a candle to this release, but this is the one that really grabbed me, and I would highly recommend this to somebody looking for something a little different for their PS1 library. So can highly recommend that if you're into strategy RPGs in general, or if you're just interested in mechs, which I have a passing interest in, but that one's really one that hooked me. The last release, I figured I should cover something that's current gen. This is a throwback game, but it is excellent. This is Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom that came out for the PS4 last year. This is an adjacent game from the Wonder Boy series. It is very much a tribute to Wonder Boy and Monster World from the Sega Genesis, but it takes the concept so much farther than that. You've got 6 playable characters in this. There's a beautiful hand-drawn design to the graphics that really stand out even amongst all the retro throwback games we're getting today. The story is excellent. It really just grabs you and keeps you playing. The game ramps up the difficulty to a nice level once you really start progressing with the game, and there's some really challenging puzzles in this. But I think for an action RPG, you really can't go wrong with this, and I wish this game would have sold much better when it came out last year. I think that it's starting to take off in interest now, but I can highly recommend this if you're looking for something for a current generation that really shows off what an action RPG can do.
Hey guys, Ultimate Floyd here. Just a short little video for Emperor Fox on my top 5 RPGs. A tough list to make, something that changes constantly for me. And RPG is a pretty broad term, so I'm including Western RPGs, turn-based, Japanese RPGs, action RPGs. Everything kind of counts for here, for this kind of list here. And I kind of want to have for a little bit of variety in here, so it's maybe like some games you could probably like kind of swap around and add and remove and stuff like that, but I wanted to maybe try to have this list kind of have some variety to it. So number 5, I'll show some games like physically for ones I have at least. Number 5 will go Diablo 2 actually on PC. Pretty important game for me. It was one of the first games I played online. And I got super addicted to it. I was just absolutely obsessed with Diablo 2, and to me, as far as like the point-and-click RPGs go, I don't think it really got better than Diablo 2. Super in-depth with like the skill system and the builds that you could have. Battle.net was so crazy too at the time, because you could even play with like a dial-up connection, which is what I had. I really loved the dark tone of that game, the atmosphere, the music is fantastic. I loved going for set items, I remember. So it was a very influential game too. It had a pretty large impact. Number 4 will go probably actually this game. This is pretty recent actually. This has already made it into my like top 10 favorite games of all time. We're talking about Persona 5 Royal on PS4 here. I love the SMT games, the Persona games in particular. Are awesome. Persona 3 was like a revelation for me. I just love the structure of these games. The balance of like school life and managing your social links, and just the way that kind of intertwines with the dungeons and the personas and kind of upgrading them and things like that. They took a 10 out of 10 game and made it like an 11 out of 10. They did so many great gameplay improvements here. Too many to name, but I think the story stuff is the most important thing for me. They really fleshed out the game and really added a lot to the kind of sort of weak ending that the original had. The new characters are amazing, and it's the themes that this game tackles in the post game, like in the new content, is it's really well done, like very well written. Like I was kind of surprised actually. It's the most I've enjoyed the actual story part of a Persona game. So you take that and just have the amazing gameplay from the original game, including those fantastic dungeons, and it's really one of the best Japanese RPGs ever made. It's certainly one of my favorite turn-based games ever made. That battle system in this game is just phenomenal. So yeah, just absolutely love this game, and it's already one of my favorite games ever. Number 3, we'll go with a Final Fantasy game, of course. I think everyone's going to have a Final Fantasy game in their top 5. I'm not going to go with a mainline game, though. I'm going to go with the spin-off game, Final Fantasy Tactics. I don't have a physical copy. I've got it on my PS Vita digitally, the War of the Lions version. Incredible game. Like the gameplay is incredible. Like it's probably the best implementation of the job system. The job system just works so well within a strategy RPG format. And then you have just the incredibly dark tone of the game and how well written it is. It's got my favorite ending to a game ever. I can't really spoil it, obviously, but the dialogue and the ending of the game is just terrific, and the way the characters' arcs kind of progress and get to that point is just... it gives you chills, actually, the ending of Tactics, and it's a very long game, tons of content to it. Obviously, there's a lot of depth with that job system, and I just loved like trying to break the game. Plenty of memorable boss battles as well. I love the world of Ivalice, of course, and this is like Matsuno's best game, I'd say. So yeah, like I love the Final Fantasy games in general, like the entire series, but like it's crazy that to me a spin-off was actually the best game, the best Final Fantasy game. If you haven't played Tactics, definitely play it. It's a masterpiece. Number 2, which again, I don't have a physical of this. I got it on the Super Nintendo Classic. It's very expensive if you want to get the original game. We're talking about Earthbound on the Super Nintendo. Very important game for me. Very influential game, a game that a lot of people didn't really like or didn't really understand when it came out. I played it when I was a kid. I didn't finish it until years later. I was kind of terrible at RPGs back then, but I definitely have nostalgia for it. Yeah, what a brilliant game. One of the best localizations in a game, and it was ahead of its time for when it came out. For 1995, the localization was just incredible. So much charm and humor to that writing. I love the characters. It really feels like a grand adventure. I love the way the game looks. A lot of people shit on the graphics, especially at the time, but I think the game looks amazing. The modern day setting was super unique for the time, and then you saw that influence on later games for sure. We wouldn't have stuff like Undertale without Earthbound, and Undertale is one of my favorite games of all time as well. I love the battle system, even the Dragon Quest style battle system. I think it's more interesting than Dragon Quest though, with the rolling health meter and just how weird and wacky the enemies are. So many memorable moments to that game. Fourside is just incredible, and Moonside, of course. You can't forget about Moonside. The soundtrack is super eclectic and just it goes from genre to genre and is very moody at times, very subdued and happy sometimes. It just completely runs the gamut, that soundtrack. One of the most underrated soundtracks, I think, to a game. It just perfectly matches the atmosphere to it. Yeah, a hell of a game. I finished it multiple times, and every time it just puts the biggest smile on my face. And now coming to number one, pretty obvious. If you know me, Dark Souls, my favorite game of all time, and probably will never change. Just a massive impact at the time where I was kind of getting disinterested in games. This came along and just blew me away. I hated it at first, but then the more I played it, the more I understood it and got into it. I could talk about this game endlessly, but the sense of exploration and discovery here is top notch. Just the amazing lore in this game that's just really fun to figure out. The great combat, the build variety, this game just keeps me coming back. I've beaten this game probably 20 times, and I never get tired of it. The world design is just impeccable. And yeah, obviously you have to talk about the influence this game has had on the industry. The most important game of the past decade. Just insane the influence this game has had on the industry. And it's had multiple games that have come after it that are all very good, but to me, Dark Souls is the king. I feel like it had the best world design, best atmosphere, best music, and just the DLC is incredible for this as well. This is a great remastered version of the game. I've talked about this. You can check my channel. I've talked about this game so many times. It's like a broken record at this point. But yeah, no, Dark Souls is a pure masterpiece.
So, without further ado, let's just start it. At number 5, we have Grandia on the PlayStation 1. This was truly a special game to me when I played it. One of the most memorable RPGs on that console, now that I think about it. It was really one of the most special games that I experienced back then. It was just at an interesting time in my life, but this tale of innocence for the most part, that progressively actually you see the characters sort of growing up. It's a great tale of coming of age, told very, very well. Probably I would argue one of the best in video games. It's because those characters, Justin, Fina, and Sue, will always be with me. When you start the game with these two little kids dreaming and playing of being great adventurers, they want to explore the world, reach the I don't remember what's it called, but the huge wall that is like the borders of the world, whatever it's called. And I still remember the moment when you're actually climbing that wall with that epic music. It was just so special because you feel you are on an adventure with them. Obviously, Grandia is very famous for introducing what is now one of the most, I would say, well-known combat systems in RPG histories. Of course, progressively, you can argue that that was improved by the sequels, but the first one introduces that, so you will always have that. Obviously, big nods to the amazing soundtrack. Pardon if I completely butchered the name, but Noriyuki Idawara, I think it's called. That is a timeless masterpiece, just like Grandia 2. I mean, those soundtracks were just so good. On number 4, we have one of the big guys to me on the PlayStation, and that is The Legend of Dragoon. This game was much more than a game to me. It was, in a way, one of those perfect games at the perfect moment in my life again, because it's one of those games that truly defined my love for RPGs, as that I was so engrossed and involved in that story, in those characters. I was truly enamored with that. I remember like spending more than 100 hours playing it. I absolutely loved the combat system. I was completely addicted to it. I really wanted to 100% it, even though by the end I gave up because it's so long to do that. But I did a lot. I 100% a lot of characters in terms of like their additions and all of that. But I remember the grand epic story, those deep and, to me at least at the time, very complex characters. As again, Legend Dragoon gave me a level of enjoyment of a video game story that I have rarely experienced up until that point, with some exceptions. But I don't remember being as involved as with these rare games. As I said, like I call it the holy trinity of RPGs for a reason, and Legend of Dragoon is part of it. Let's move to number 3, and here's the wild card. Not very differently from my entry on the podcast, I'm gonna go with the Legend of Heroes series, but I always find very difficult, very weird to pick a favorite, because obviously I cannot say the Legend of Heroes games, there are too many. But it's always fun to point out a representative to me has something special. And contrary to the podcast, I'm going to go with a different one. And here's one of the few games I can actually show you guys, because most of my games that I'm talking about are not with me. But I'm going to go with Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky, the third, not second chapter like in the podcast. And why am I going with this? I was really, really attached to, and still am, to the Trails in the Sky trilogy. It's a very interesting part. Like, it didn't feel like the Legend of Heroes games, the Kiseki, let's say, series, didn't feel as big as it is now until this game. This is when the proper world building started within the Kiseki games. It shows you what was going on around the continent. So again, because first and second chapter are just focused on the kingdom of Liberal, and this takes place there as well. But you see also, as I said, what's going on in other countries. It's started to explore this vast world much more. And it has, obviously, my favorite protagonist of the whole series with Kevin. I love Estelle. She's Bestel for a reason, of course. I like Reen, but Kevin is truly, truly special. He has a phenomenal tale of redemption. Once you start knowing more about him, it's absolutely fantastic. The music, it's phenomenal, like in all Trails games. The combat system is the same from second chapter, so it's great, obviously. Maybe it's not as updated as the Cold Steel games, but it's basically the same thing. Number 2, we're going to go, of course, with Final Fantasy VI. My personal Final Fantasy game, one of the greatest RPGs ever made, ever, to me. This is truly one of those monumental games, again, that everyone should play, I think. If you like RPGs, you have to play this. It's one of those mandatory games. Though it was released on the Super Nintendo originally, I played it on the PlayStation 1 because we didn't have it on the Super Nintendo in Europe. But it's basically the same thing on the PlayStation 1. It has the same gorgeous SNES graphics. As we all know, the game has one of the most legendary Final Fantasy stories, one of the best soundtrack in the series. It has the true classic combat system that you would expect from old school Final Fantasy, which is great. And but those characters, that twist, it has the best villain in the series with Kefka, no stories there. As I said, it's a true classic and a mandatory RPG for everyone in a way. Like, if you want to know what's so special about RPGs, play Final Fantasy VI. And number one, of course, we have not only my favorite RPG of all time, but my favorite game of all time, which is, of course, Breath of Fire 4. I am a huge fan of this series. From the first one to the fifth one, I love them all, but the third one was the real big deal to me because it's basically the game that made me fanatical about JRPGs in the first place, as I said already. I've experienced JRPGs before, and RPGs in general, but my first experience with the Ultima series was not a happy one. Phantasy Star 2 brought things back into the right direction, but it was truly with the PlayStation 1 and Breath of Fire 3, Final Fantasy 6, and Legend of Dragoon that I fell in love with the genre, and these are the games that made me the fan that I am today, basically. And with Breath of Fire 4, this is basically Breath of Fire 3 on steroids. It's everything the 3 did, which is really good. Breath of Fire 3 is a fantastic game, but better. So it has probably my favorite version of the turn-based combat system still. This game looks gorgeous. Especially like for PlayStation 1 standards, this was like out of this world gorgeous. But even today, 20 years later, it still holds up. It has one of my favorite antagonists of all time with the character of Fo Lu, of course, a fantastic sort of like god character who lost completely faith in humanity and decided to destroy them all in a very organic way, I would say, both in build up all of this and then his decline into fury and rage. Really great stuff. Ryu, of course, it's a great incarnation of him. The same with Nina. But all the rest of the characters absolutely unforgettable, from Ursula, Shia, Scry, Ershin, Days, everyone. Fantastic characters. A really gorgeous world. As I said, this is Breath of Fire at its zenith, at its best, and my favorite game of all time, and my number one RPG of all time.
Hey guys, Leo here. So my good buddy Emperor Fox asked me what were my top 3 favorite RPGs of all time. Now a top 3 was pretty easy to come up with. A top 5 would have been currently a little bit more difficult. So in third place I have Final Fantasy X, and even though I'm holding so many different copies of this game here, I have only ever beaten this game on the PlayStation 4 and on the Vita thanks to cross-save. Now, my PlayStation 3 version is still sealed, and I hope to one day play it and beat again on the Switch. Now, Final Fantasy X still has my favorite story across any video games I have ever played. I also love how cinematic this game is, and also that hymn that you can't stop humming as you're playing this game. Now this came to me as a great recommendation from good buddies of mine, and I'm happy to say that it lived up to expectations and to those recommendations, and that's why it is here in number 3. Coming in second place, it's Persona 4 Golden on the Vita. Now I never got to play the original Persona 4 game. Since I played and beat this game here, after that I played Persona 3 Portable, Persona Q1, Persona Q2, and Persona 5. Still have not played Persona 5 Royal yet. So after having played all those Persona games, I'm pretty sure Persona 1 and 2 don't really exist, right? Persona started with the third one, at least as what I'm told by good buddies of mine. Now, I played Persona 4 Golden 4.5 times. I got the platinum for this game here. I still think it has the best cast of characters and my favorite soundtrack across all the other Persona games. As far as gameplay is concerned, I think 5 made it better, but I still love what 4 had to offer. And pretty much, it's almost like it remains the same from 3, 4, and 5 in almost all the other characteristics that these games have to offer, and I love the Persona series. And that being said, out of all the ones that I've played, excluding 1 and 2 that don't exist, 4 Golden is still my favorite one on the series, and my second favorite RPGs of all time. Coming in first place, you guys know me, you guys know what to expect here already, is Xenoblade Chronicles 2 on the Switch. Now, I put over 250 hours in this game if you bring in Torna, the DLC, with this one here as well. I love pretty much everything about this game. Love the soundtrack, the cast of characters, the type of story it is here. If you want to go super deep and geek out on this game, you can. If you just want to be shallow, you still can. I love the gameplay and how you have to invest in that gameplay to have fun with it. I love all the systems they implemented in this game here. I'm all for those systems in JRPGs and RPGs in general. And the open world that's just marvelous, and everything that they created in here. How beautiful everything looks and how majestic everything is in this game. Still holds the first place in my collection here. I hope more future games can actually replace this one, because that's only gonna mean that better games have come out. But for now, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 has been since I played this game. This was my game of the year when I played this year, in one of those years that was great for gaming. It still is my favorite JRPG of all time, and I hope it can be replaced soon. But until then, in first place, I still have Xenoblade Chronicles 2. So, hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Fox, for allowing me to be part of your video here. I wish you all the success in the world and looking forward to whatever it is that you are concocting there for your top whatever you're coming up with. Anyways, I'll see you guys next time.
These 5 titles I have chosen, they're not necessarily my favorites, but I think they're 5 really important titles to me. Now, we're going to start off with Persona 3 FES. And a lot of people may be like, not Persona 5. Listen, Persona 5 is an amazing game. Persona 4 is an amazing game. Persona 3 was an amazing game. Persona 2 I haven't really finished, and Persona 1 sucked, as well as the remake. But that's just me. But Persona 3 actually came about at a really key point in my life. And I fell in love with this game. Something about it, I think it was the characters, the voice acting, the dark aesthetic to it, you know, the whole sees, you know, for whatever reason, I've always enjoyed high school based RPGs. Like when it's just a bunch of high school kids getting into mischief. I've always enjoyed that, but it could be because I enjoy coming of age stories, which this really isn't, I would say. It's a lot darker than that, but it did also have a structure. You know, you have a certain amount of time for social links, you have a certain amount of time to go into the dungeon, a certain amount of time to finish your objective. And this game taught me a lot. And I honestly, it was edutainment, end of day, which I think makes this really important to me. I can't do one of these lists without mentioning Final Fantasy IV, because it taught me how to read. Not taught me how to read, it made me more engaged and passionate about reading. Because up until then, as a kid, I really wasn't interested in reading. It just didn't appeal to me. And matter of fact, I actually could not read until about halfway through the first grade, just because nobody bothered to look and go, hey, is this kid having difficulty with reading comprehension? True story. Luckily, I had a teacher that pulled me aside and helped teach me, but I hadn't read anything that got me engaged until I played Final Fantasy II, which was what it was over here, with this kid at a bike shop, because he was playing it, and this high fantasy aesthetic and storyline with Cecil Harvey, one of my favorite Final Fantasy characters, as a Dark Knight in his road to redemption, really got me. I was so enthralled with it. The characters, the graphics, the music, the story. I wanted more of it, and I read everything. I've replayed this game, every single version it has, except the phone version, I've played through. I know this game like the back of my hand, and even with all like the tweaks and the remasters and all this sort of stuff, the story to me is still good and still impactful. And I also have to mention Lunar Silver Star. This kind of goes hand in hand with it, but the funny thing about Lunar, and the reason why it is so important to me, is because I literally remember the day I saw this game. I was at Blockbuster with my uncle, and we were going through the games for rent, and I had a Sega CD at the time, and we were just looking to see what they had, and I saw this thing, Lunar Silver Star, and we saw the anime cover art. And I flipped it over and saw the main character's name was Alex. Only reason. That is the only reason why I wanted to play this game. Didn't care what it was. And then I got it for Christmas, and I fell in love with it. It was, you know, again, that RPG, high fantasy, but now there was anime in it. And anime was really just coming around at that point in my life. And oddly enough, I know a lot of people really don't care for the working designs localizations in hindsight, because they are very topical. I grew up in what they were talking about, so for me, it's still hysterical to this day. And then next up, we're going to talk about a Super Nintendo game, The Illusion of Gaia. The second game in the Quintet trilogy, which is unofficially Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, and Terra Enigma, which we did not get over here. Now, Soul Blazer is an amazing game. A lot of people say Terra Enigma is the best game out of the two, but Illusion of Gaia holds yet another important place in my life, because I remember reading about it in Nintendo Power. I remember seeing those graphics and just being so impressed by this action RPG, something I'd only seen in The Legend of Zelda up until that point, because I had not played Soul Blazer until I started on YouTube back in like 2011. Believe it or not, didn't even know it was a sequel or a prequel. But seeing Illusion of Gaia and Nintendo Power really just, it got me excited. I didn't even know what the game was about. And then they said it came with a t-shirt, and I will be honest with you, I would kill to have that shirt again. I do not know why. It is the cheesiest thing in the world, but I wore it to death as a kid. And one of my friends, same scenario with her, and I mentioned it to her, I think maybe like a month ago. I said, hey, remember Illusion of Guy? She goes, man, that t-shirt was so comfortable. Like, no thought process. And this game, to me, at that particular moment, I was getting really involved in world history in school. I was kind of nerding out over it. I found it so fascinating. And Illusion of Gaia really touches on a lot of historical content. And it makes it video gamey, of course. It takes some liberties, throws in some magic and all that other stuff. But, you know, hearing about the Angkor Wat and, you know, the Great Wall and all these other things, I was learning about it. So it got me more involved in school. And that's where I say, like, these lists really change. Because for me, it can go either way. It can go like, this game is amazing to play, or this game was at a key point in my life, so it's important. And Illusion of Gaia was at a key point in my life. I think I've touched on nostalgia enough. I gotta go out and I gotta give it to Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Now, whoa, hang on. Whoa, Xenoblade Chronicles 2? That's so recent. Why? The definitive just came out as of this recording in the year of our Lord, June 2020. Dude, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 reminded me why I love JRPGs so much. That's why it was important. It wasn't the fact that, you know, we had the fan service and boobies and, you know, the panty shots and the anime and the, you know, the anime storyline and the cliches and, you know, all that other stuff. It just reminded me, like, hey, epic, grand storylines, watching characters develop, watching friendships be made, watching love, watching loss, watching characters grow. This is why I enjoy JRPGs, or RPGs in general. I love that journey story. I love coming of age stories. And we see Rex grow up a lot in this game, I think. And even in the sequel, or the prequel technically, the Golden Country Torna, it does explain a lot of stuff. It adds to it. And that's where I think is good storytelling. You can make a prequel or a sequel for the sake of making more money, or you can have that lore and you can build on it, or build up into that foundation and make it better. And I think as a whole, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 did that in spades, man. It's a fantastic game. Take it or leave it. Some people really didn't care for the story. Some people love the battle system. Some people hate the battle system and hate the story. For me, again, going through it, it reminded me why I love JRPGs.